My name's Natalie Nash. I'm 33 and I'm a freelance product designer. I work mostly from home, nothing fancy, just me, my laptop, and some quiet space. 3 months ago, I walked into a law office to hear my dad's will. My siblings were already there, Mark, Sandra, and Kyle, dressed like they were closing some big business deal. They barely looked up when I came in. I sat down quietly, already guessing what would happen. They'd get the house, the money, maybe his old Mustang. And me? Well, I got a folder, some old patents, a few blueprints, and a letter from Dad. He wrote, "Be patient, Natalie. The world always takes time to catch up with ideas that were too early." At the time, I didn't know what that meant, but a few weeks later, Apple called. The lawyer's name was Mr. Garrison. He looked like he hadn't changed his glasses since the 80s, cleared his throat, opened the folder, and started reading. "To Mark Nash," he said, "your father leaves the 1967 Mustang and the family cabin in Tahoe." Mark smirked like he'd just won the lottery. He always wanted that car. "To Sandra Nash Williams, the house at 447 Oakwood Drive and all its contents." Sandra actually gasped. That house could sell for at least 800 grand. "To Kyle Nash, all investment portfolios and cash savings, totaling around $500,000. Kyle leaned back like he was at a poker table and just hit the jackpot. And then Mr. Garrison looked at me. "To Natalie Nash, he leaves the complete patent portfolio and associated documents." That was it, just that. For a second the room went quiet, then Mark burst out laughing. "Seriously? She gets Dad's old inventor junk." Sandra nearly spit out her coffee. "Oh my God, Natalie, enjoy your paperwork." Kyle just shook his head and said, "Well, someone had to get the trash." I didn't say anything. I just took the folder, held it in my lap, and kept my face still. It's something you learn to do when people think you're not worth much. They walked out smiling, keys in hand, talking about furniture and flipping houses. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody even offered me a ride. Lucas met me out front. He saw my face, didn't say a word, just unlocked the car door. And as I buckled in, I whispered, "They gave me paper." Lucas looked at me and said, "Yeah, but sometimes paper changes the world." We got back to the apartment just before sunset. It smelled like chamomile tea and old wood. The kind of place where nothing ever really changes, except you. I set the folder on the kitchen table. Lucas made tea, didn't ask questions. That's his thing, he waits until I'm ready. Hours later, after dinner, after dishes, after silence, I opened it. Inside were about 30 patents, old diagrams, sketches, some typed, some written by hand in Dad's careful, all-caps handwriting. The first one was labeled, "Method and apparatus for providing tactile feedback in touch-sensitive devices." Filed in 1997. Granted 1998. Haptic feedback. That weird thing Dad used to go on about, making digital touch feel real. Back then, nobody cared. He pitched the idea to companies, they all said no. Too early, no market, people prefer buttons. I remember being 12, sitting in the garage while he wired up some prototype with duct tape and wires sticking out. He made me close my eyes and swipe across a screen. I remember how excited he looked when it buzzed under my fingers. That night, I found the letter, tucked between two patents. "Natalie, I know it doesn't look like much, but I believe in this, and I believe in you. Keep this safe. The world isn't ready yet, but you always were." Dad. I sat there for a long time, just holding it, reading the same sentence over and over. Lucas came in, handed me a cup of tea. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just looked at me and said, "Your dad wasn't building tech. He was building trust in the one person who still listened." That's when it clicked. These weren't just papers. They were pieces of something bigger. Something the world said no to. But Dad said yes, quietly, stubbornly, like only he could. And maybe, just maybe. It wasn't over yet. It was a Tuesday morning. Cloudy. The kind of sky that makes you forget what month it is. I was halfway through a freelance project, designing a coffee grinder app, nothing groundbreaking. Lucas was at the co-op, getting oat milk. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. California area code. I almost didn't pick up. Almost. "Hi, is this Natalie Nash?" "Yes." This is Rebecca Chin, legal counsel with Apple Inc. I sat up, like physically sat straighter. Apple, yes ma'am. I'm calling regarding a set of patents registered to Dr. Leonard Nash. I didn't say anything. We believe several of our technologies, particularly in haptic feedback, may intersect with your father's intellectual property. Specifically patent number 5,830,2419. I nearly dropped my phone. We'd like to discuss a potential licensing agreement. Retroactive. I blinked. Retro, what now? I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer, I said. I barely know what these documents mean. My father, he passed, and I just have them. I understand, she said. May I suggest you retain legal representation? This matter is substantial. There was a pause. How substantial? Another pause. Then, our preliminary estimate just for Apple is in the $50 million range, as a starting point. Silence, not from her, from me, because my brain had completely left the chat. 50 million, I managed to say thank you, or something like it, hung up. Then sat there on the rug, knees up, tea cold, staring at the patents like they'd just grown legs. Lucas walked in. I looked up and said, "Hey babe," Apple called. He froze, like the fruit, or the trillion-dollar company, the second one. And then I burst out laughing. That weird kind of laugh that comes from shock and joy and disbelief all rolled into one. And he laughed too, just because I couldn't stop. Dad once said, "It's not crazy if the future catches up." Well, looks like it finally did. I didn't sleep much that night. Lucas curled up next to me with his laptop, searching patent lawyers who don't charge by the minute. We found one, David's son, Boston-based, ex-Silicon Valley. The kind of guy who wore hoodies to court and still won. When I handed him Dad's folder, he flipped through it like he was reading scripture. 10 minutes in, he looked up and said, "Your father wasn't just ahead of his time. He built the road everyone else is driving on." I blinked. David leaned back, hands behind his head. These patents, they're foundational. iPhones, Samsungs, Pixels, haptic feedback, pressure sensors, multi-touch. Every single one touches this. I asked him one question, "Can we prove it?" He just smiled. "We don't need to prove it. They need to explain why they used it for 10 years without asking." And that's when it started. Apple came first. We negotiated for 3 months. They were polite, corporate polite. Clean language, sharp lawyers, quiet tension. In the end, we settled for $50 million up front, plus royalties. Then Samsung called. Then Google. Then Microsoft. Every time my phone rang, Lucas would raise an eyebrow and ask, "Is it another fruit company?" The numbers climbed. Retroactive settlements, ongoing royalties, licensing deals. David structured everything smart. We didn't take buyouts. We took slices, small percentages, of billions in revenue. I started getting monthly reports. Google Pixel product line, Q1 usage, 3.2 million units. Royalty due, $1 million. Samsung Galaxy Series, H1 haptic module, license tech confirmed. Royalty due, $2 million. It was unreal. Meanwhile, my siblings, they still thought I got the junk folder. Mark texted one day, "Hey, a random question, but do you still have Dad's patent papers? We're thinking of selling the Tahoe cabin, might bundle the IP rights. Let me know." I didn't reply. The next day he followed up. "Okay, but seriously, someone from Apple called me asking about patent transfers. Can we talk?" I replied with 3 numbers, 5,830,2419, and one word, no. He didn't message again. It started small. A tech blog ran a piece. Forgotten genius behind iPhone tactile design, meet Dr. Leonard Nash. I didn't even know they were writing it. The article went viral. Next came Wired. Then Bloomberg. Then a segment on NPR. 30 years ago, a soft-spoken university professor filed patents nobody wanted. Today, his daughter is licensing those same ideas to the world's biggest tech empires. They asked to interview me, TV crews, podcasts, tech panels. I said no at first. I wasn't built for the spotlight. But then Lucas said, "Maybe you don't have to speak for yourself. Maybe you just tell his story." So I said yes. The studio was cold. I wore jeans and Dad's old cardigan, the brown one with elbow patches. The host asked, "When did you realize your father's work had real value?" I smiled, the day Apple called me. But he always knew. And just like that, my chest got tight. I remembered a night, maybe 10 years ago. I'd come home from college. He was in the garage, hunched over a busted prototype. It was supposed to simulate resistance, like when your finger hits a digital button and the screen gently pushes back. But it didn't work. He sighed, rubbed his forehead. Then he looked up and saw me watching. I said, "You okay?" He grinned, "Nope, it's a disaster." Then he chuckled, "But it's my disaster." We sat on the floor, surrounded by wires and tea mugs and failure. He handed me a screwdriver. "Want to help break it some more?" We laughed until the power cut out. That's what I remember. Not the money, not the courtrooms or contracts, just that laugh, that room, that moment when nobody believed in him except the girl holding the flashlight. The interview ended. The camera shut off, and the host turned to me quietly and said, "Your dad was brilliant." I nodded. Yeah, he was, and he never needed the world to say it. But I'm glad they finally did. About a week after the first headlines, Mark called. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Then came the text. "Hey Nat, crazy stuff, huh? Heard some chatter about Dad's patents, maybe we should talk?" Then Sandra messaged me. "Hi sweetheart, I saw you on that Bloomberg clip. You looked so elegant. Let's reconnect soon." It's time, don't you think? Kyle just sent, "So you still got those worthless papers?" Asking for a friend. I didn't reply, I didn't need to. They'd all moved on so quickly after the will. Took their cars, their cash, their keys, and walked away. Didn't even come back for the funeral planning. Didn't check in when I was packing up Dad's garage alone. Didn't ask about the folder. But now they remembered I existed. Sandra called again a few days later. She opened with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "Natalie, I just want to say I'm sorry. I mean, we didn't know how much Dad's work meant to you." To me. I almost laughed. "You don't have to apologize," I said quietly. "He didn't leave it to you. He left it to me because I was the only one who listened." There was silence. Then came the guilt trip. "Well, we're still family, right? If there's financial upside, maybe we can, figure something out. Fair's fair." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "You all took what was easy to measure," I said. "I took what was easy to ignore." And I hung up. Next, Kyle tried a softer approach. He sent pictures of his twins. Then, "You always said family meant more than money." "Don't forget that now." I responded once. I didn't forget. "You did." Mark was the most blunt. "We're contesting the will." "This is insane. You didn't even know what those papers meant." I just replied with a link. USPTO patent 5,832,419. And the article, "The Forgotten Father of Touchscreen Feedback." No caption, no defense, just facts. They wanted to come back into my life with new smiles and old habits, but I wasn't the same Natalie anymore. Dad always said, "Some people won't see value unless it's printed on a check." Turns out they didn't want me, they just wanted a cut. And I wasn't sharing. I didn't go buy a mansion. Didn't run off to Bali. Didn't lease a Lamborghini to park in front of a coffee shop I don't even drink at. Instead, I bought a house with good bones. Quiet street, big windows, and one thing that mattered more than anything else, a garage that could finally become a real workshop. I filled it slowly. Oscilloscopes, soldering kits, haptic testing units, old notebooks, new notebooks. I even found one of Dad's original breadboards online, the exact model he used in the early 2000s. It cost more in shipping than it did when it was new. I bought it anyway. On the shelf above the workbench sits a framed copy of patent 5,832,419. Not because I'm showing off, but because I need to remember. This wasn't luck. This wasn't some random windfall. This was a man who saw further than most and kept going even when nobody cared. And it was passed down to someone who chose to believe anyway. The second royalty check, the one bigger than the first, didn't go into stocks or luxury. I used it to start something Dad would have smiled at. The Leonard Nash Innovation Grant. It's small at first, but real. $50,000 a year, no resume required, no degree necessary, just an idea the world doesn't understand yet. People laughed at Dad for decades, called him obsessed, impractical, old-fashioned. But now, every touchscreen device in every pocket carries his fingerprint. So the grant goes to people like that, tinkerers, thinkers, late-night dreamers. The kind of folks still scribbling on napkins and taking apart toasters in their garage. Sometimes I get letters from the applicants. One woman wrote, "They said no one would ever need a fabric that responds to heat. Your grant says maybe someone will." And I thought, yeah, Dad would have told her to keep going. Not all victories are loud. Some arrive in silence, in small rooms, with hands covered in wire dust and coffee rings on blueprints. The truth is, I don't need my siblings' approval. I don't even need the recognition anymore. I've got a workshop, a new notebook, and a little piece of the future humming gently in my hands. Next to my desk, the latest royalty statement sits unopened. Not because I don't care, but because I already have everything I need today. A soldering pen, a dream that doesn't quit, and the echo of my father's laugh still alive in every idea that refuses to die. What comes next? I build, quietly, like he did. Epilogue, a question, a ring, and a quiet yes. The night the third royalty check came in, I didn't celebrate with champagne, just tea. And Eli, he's been here since the beginning. Since the days I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through Dad's dusty folders. He never asked how much, never looked at me like a number. Only ever said one thing: whatever you build, I want to build it beside you. So when he pulled out the little box in the middle of the workshop, dust on our sleeves, half a circuit board between us, I didn't cry. I just nodded. "Yeah," I whispered. "Let's do this." No diamonds. Just a band made of brushed steel and copper, recycled from one of Dad's old prototypes. Perfect. Sometimes the things everyone ignores are the ones that carry the most weight. Now it's your turn. If you've ever believed in something that nobody else saw value in, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or left out, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video made you feel something, hope, pride, maybe just a quiet smile, hit the like, click subscribe, and share this with someone who's still building in silence. Let's remind the world, not all treasures look like treasure, until the world finally catches up.